The television series Lost was obviously a seminal time for you. What is the origin for the idea in getting lost? And what is the point of view for the documentary in relationship to the series?
Sure, yeah. So the director, Taylor Morden, he directed the indie film The Last Blockbuster, which is literally the last blockbuster video in existence by where he lives in Bend, Oregon. And he had been a fan of the show as well. He had been a fan of Lost. And as it was, probably about 3 years ago, they realized that it didn't seem like ABC had any big reunion or any big thing planned for the 20th anniversary of the series premiere, which had been on September 22nd, 2004. So he thought this is going to be my next documentary is why 20 years later is the fandom of this show going just as strong as it ever was 2 decades later. Why is it connecting so much with new binge watchers that, first it was on Hulu, then now it's on Netflix. And, what is its legacy? Lost came at a very, very unique time when you look at kind of the television and media landscape.
Yeah,
There was no DVRs, like unless you had TiVo.
right,
Okay. There was no Twitter was not a thing.
right,
Facebook was not really a thing, or else it was newly invented, and most people weren't on it. So
right.
Law started in 2004. I know that I personally connected around 2000 in 2008, and it was really like this more innocent time, right, of like
Right.
message boards and all this sort of thing. And so he wanted to explore that as well. And so he and his wife Emily Morden, who's another producer, and Ralph Apel, who is also a gigantic Lost fan and was a Lost podcaster at the time for a podcast called the Dharmalars. They all decided, hey, let's do this. And at the time, and it was meant to be really more about the fandom at that point. Why has the fandom persisted? Why is this show so special? What is it about this show that has made it persist and be so beloved, as opposed to, several other kind of serialized dramas. And so that's how it started out. But then about 2 years into their project, into kind of, having interviewed fans mostly for it.
Hmm.
Mo Ryan, who is a local stellar Chicago journalist, came out with a book called, I think it's called Burn It All Down or Burn It Down. And it is about kind of the systemic racism and sexism in Hollywood writers' rooms, which, she had access to for decades and was particularly close to the Lost writing team. And then Vanity Fair chose to excerpt the chapter dedicated to the Lost writers' room in an article that came out, and it was just explosive. I mean, it like rocked Hollywood and really was sickening. I mean, I ran out that day that it came out, got the article, and was physically nauseous reading about how, showrunner Carlton Cuse had made very, very visceral, like racist, like horrible remarks about some of the cast members, and just kind of this reveal that all of the writers of color and the women writers were just basically ignored or constantly, verbally harassed. And so at that point, Taylor and Ralph and Emily kind of stopped, and they were like, this is over. We can't, people, this has changed the legacy of the show. We can't celebrate it. And so they decided, no, we're going to cover this. We're going to cover
Okay.
this as well. And it really changed from there.
Of course, it's the ending that confounded persons who had watched it to that point. What is your opinion on that controversial ending? And not to give anything away, but did it age well?
I think it aged better.
Okay.
I think that, so first off, there's an entire segment in the documentary, a long segment about
Sure.
the finale.
Sure.
Because as you said, people, it was a kind of loved it or hate it. Most people hated it at the time. I will admit that the first time I watched it, I had the same impression that a lot of people had, which
Hmm.
was wrong. And I remember my husband, being like, "Hey, hey, hey, I don't think you're like, let's watch it again." And then there's kind of some critical parts that, in my hyped up stage about like, what is happening with the show?
Yeah,
Like
no, I
I
get it.
had kind of ignored. But yeah, I think now, especially now when the world is so divided, and things are, so bitter everywhere, the ending is actually aged well because, again, not to give anything away, but it's certainly what I kind of hope happens in life, is uh is how I interpret the ending. And I will say that Evangeline Lilly, who plays Kate Austen in the show, and then went on, to be in Marvel, and she's the Wasp, and
Yeah.
she's in the Hobbit trilogy. She said something very profound in the documentary about how people kind of expected Lost to answer some of the same questions that all major religions in the world have been grappling with for
Interesting.
millennia, and it was never going to do that. So yeah, but
That's
I would
interesting.
say, yeah, I would say to your readers and your listeners, like, if you hated the Lost finale, see this documentary,
Ha ha ha
because
ha ha.
even if you liked the rest of the show or you hated the
Right.
show, like, there's things to learn there and think about. I think, 10 years, 14 years after the finale, for sure.
Let's talk a little about J.J. Abrams, his streak of affecting TV and film culture in a profound way, especially during that era. What is your opinion of Abrams as a creator, both with Lost and his other series? Is there a particular characteristic that immediately identifies an Abrams TV series?
Well, what I think is really interesting, and I just had mentioned Evangeline Lilly, but he had this knack for finding female leads that were
Right,
unknowns.
right,
So Jennifer Garner
right,
in Alias,
right.
Carrie Russell and Felicity, which I was a huge fan of, and then here comes Evangeline Lilly and Lost, and all of them have gone on to, like, superstardom, right? Hollywood success. So I definitely think, like, that's something he's done. People will laugh about his kind of like, what's that thing? The glare,
Yeah, the
the like,
glare, the flare.
right, the flare and the glare, all that kind of stuff. But he is in the documentary a lot. He was actually
Good.
the very last person they were able to get. They had to add
Nice.
him in after they have edited.
Oh
they'd
man.
edited it down from they'd edited it down from 4 hours and 30 minutes to 2 hours, and then
Yeah.
they got him, and they had to add him in.
Wow.
But yeah, one of the things that I think, his impact and his legacy is that he is unafraid to take risks, and to not necessarily, and some people that
Right.
maybe didn't like Lost are going to groan at this part, but like, he's okay with not having all the answers all the time when he starts
Cool.
a project. So
That's
yeah,
interesting.
I loved hearing his perspective in it too, because he shot the Lost premiere, I mean the Lost pilot, and then was whisked away to do Mission Impossible 3.
Right.
So
Right.
the rest of the team was kind of left like, oh my God, we had JJ as our, and then he left. And so that's, discussed as well. But I think that was kind of an interesting bind the team was in.
That's cool. So as you were watching the series unfold, at what point or season were you most engaged and felt like the series was at its peak? And did you feel any disconnection as the show went on to its inevitable conclusion?
Well, the first part's really easy for me, and most people would, almost everybody I talk to says the same thing about what hooked them in the show. It was the episode called Walkabout, which is technically the third episode of the show.
Okay.
It is, where a really big reveal, it ends with a really big reveal about the character Locke, who was my favorite character. And I used to have a blog called Long Live Locke. So he was my favorite. And when that reveal happened, and there's a segment about this in the documentary as well, then you were like, whoa, like this is something different. This is like sci-fi drama, something
Right.
I have not really seen. So I do think season one was the strongest. I'm always a sucker for backstories and like origin stories, if for everything from Lord of the Rings to the Marvel movies, the first one's always my favorite because it's setting it all up. And I just love that. And so season one of Lost was, you get flashbacks on every major character and you kind of realize who they were before the plane crashed on the island. Um, I
Okay.
loved the entire series, but there was a time I'm sure you remember this, Pat, where there was a Hollywood writers' strike. I
Right.
think it was somewhere around season two. And I mean, it was, I think, season
Right.
two and three, where they had to drag things out. There was long, and this is now I guess the benefit of binging something now is that
Right.
you didn't
Right.
have to you didn't have to wait 7 weeks for in between episodes and
Interesting.
forget half of it. And yeah, so I think when that was going on, and there's a very big segment in the documentary about how the showrunners had to negotiate with ABC about an end date because they knew they were running out of material to keep all these mysteries going. And that is a fundamental way that the series changed TV forever. Is now there are no showrunners that don't go in already having arced out the
Right.
ending. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
And they negotiate that. And that was because of Lost and because of that season, which again, I think was season 2, 3, where they really had a lot of filler. There's a
Right.
whole episode about how the main character, Jack, played by Matthew Fox, got his tattoos. It
Yeah.
was not good.
So finally, what in your background in pop and media culture created the runway for your obsession with Lost, and how do you think, as an executive producer, you have contributed to this overall project?
Sure. It's really funny because even in second grade, I was writing. I was writing crazy stories about little aliens and all this kind of stuff. And then, I was involved in my newspaper at college. And then I got to grad school and I was still involved in my newspaper. And pop culture for me was always an escape. People have different things, right? They watch NASCAR, they watch sports, they watch wrestling. For me, it was always TV and movies. My husband and I, our theme of our wedding reception was like TV and movie characters, like famous
Nice.
couples that, so we always bonded over, movies and TV.
Nice.
And so for me, when Lost came on, I was working at JP Morgan and I couldn't not write about it. Like that's how much
Hmm.
it grabbed me. And I
Right.
started writing and that blog that I wrote got to be so popular that it gave me the confidence to leave corporate America in 2007
Wow.
and become a full-time freelance writer. And immediately 3 freelance jobs fell into my lap from people at companies, who had read my blog. Like they loved my writing about Lost and they're like, "Hey, we want you to write for us." And it was
Oh my
even about like
gosh.
business stuff. And that's how I met you, Pat, is that's when I
Right.
became a
Right.
freelance film critic
Right.
back in 2008. And
Right.
so,
Same
for
year I started.
me, for me, Lost answers the big question. It asks the big questions about why are we here? What's important? What is our purpose? And it doesn't answer those. It leaves those up for you to decide, but it gives you a lot of things to think about. And I love those big questions.
Excellent.
And so for me, as an executive producer, I named my son Desmond after one of the characters. This show literally changed the course of my life and my career. I couldn't not be involved. And so, first off, my initial role was providing funding in the Indiegogo because this is an independently, produced film. And so Taylor and Emily's production house is Pop Motion Pictures, and they were running an Indiegogo to be able to, fly all over the place and interview the cast members. That was the other thing that changed just real quick is that this started being about the fandom And
Right.
all of the cast love this. They love this show and its legacy so much that they all called each other and were basically like, hey, these guys are legit. Let's do this. And so we
Cool.
never expected that. And so my biggest contribution as an executive producer was that they had hundreds of hours of footage. Taylor had masterfully edited it down to 4.5 hours of a movie, but he needed to get it to 2 hours. And I, being the anal retentive type A nerd that I am, went minute by minute through those 4.5 hours again and again and again, providing
Wow.
line by line edits of this doesn't make sense. You could combine this. This is repetitive, to help him get it down to 2 hours.
How about that?
And I was very proud of that because I feel like I was, trying to be objective and not just let my favorite characters in it, have all the time. But I also was really looking for a balance between men and women, like commentating on it, and also like just having diverse commentators throughout the documentary was really important to the entire team. And I
Right.
felt, as a female executive producer, I was the only female executive producer. I felt, and like I really was able to contribute in that way.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2024.